After growing up in religion and the tradition of Christianity and spending so much time reading the Bible, studying the Bible, teaching the Bible, praying, fasting, going to Christian schools, hanging out with Christian people all the time, going to college to study to become a pastor because I wanted to do that. I thought that was my calling. I thought God was calling me to do that. After all of that, I got to a place where I changed my mind about pretty much everything I grew up believing and started deconstructing, and eventually I walked away from the faith and started this journey of self-discovery or seeking truth and open-mindedness and curiosity, and it led me to where I am today. And something that I get asked often is, hey dude, like what the hell happened to you? What started this questioning? Why did you leave the tradition that you were brought up in and you were so dedicated to it? And yeah, that's the truth. Like I devoted my life to my faith and I was absolutely grounded in it, and I would have never dreamed that I would eventually walk away from it. So what happened? Well, the answer to that question is why I'm making this video, because the answer is very important and it could potentially help you and lead you into questioning some of the things you believe. And it doesn't really have so much to do with religion or a particular kind of religion, although this is very common in religion. The answer I'm going to share here is something that can apply to pretty much any aspect of life, okay? So I got to a place where, by the way, let me just throw this in here. When I was studying to become a pastor, I wanted to be a theologian too. So I was spending time with scholars and theologians and people that knew a lot about the Bible and history and the Greek and Hebrew and early church stuff, because I was obsessed with all of that. And really, for as long as I can remember, growing up as a kid, I was just very fascinated by religion in general and God and the afterlife. And I always had a million questions, and I would ask my parents and grandparents and family members, because we were all Catholic, so we all believed the same thing. Like I said, everyone I knew was Christian. Or growing up, I was Catholic for the first 11 or 12 years of my life, and then I spent some time in several different denominations, and then the non-denomination, and so I got a lot of different glimpses of the different denominations and branches of Christianity throughout the time that I was in that faith, which was helpful. It was really good because it gave me an understanding of the many different ways the Bible has been interpreted and understood and stuff like that. And it increased my knowledge more than anything. But anyway, yeah, so during that time in my life when I was really on track to become a pastor and maybe even a theologian, and I'm filling my life with people that are in that world, I got into apologetics. I got really interested in apologetics because, I'd see people on TV and stuff, apologists and scholars and theologians, and apologetics is simply defending the faith, defending what you believe. So what would happen was there were a few things I had doubts about when it came to like theology, and then I would see so-and-so up there like winning a debate against someone who was an unbeliever or an atheist or something. And I would cheer them on, and I would get so pumped up and hyped up because I was so convinced that this person, this apologist, was like the person, and they had all the answers, and they could defend anything, and they could convey these different arguments and ideas, and they would quote the Bible and quote history and bring up these scientific facts and connect all the dots. And it was very entertaining. It was very intriguing for me at the time. And like I said, that's what I wanted to do. And hearing this gave me a lot of confidence and assurance because, like I said, I had a few doubts that I wouldn't really tell anyone. But hearing it from the experts, hearing what they had to say, and knowing that they could pretty much answer any question or doubt that I had about the faith was a very good feeling. And essentially, I wanted to be able to do that someday. So, what did I do? I increased my time in the Bible. And one of the things that I noticed was that that doubt that I had about certain things, what was really going on there was, and I didn't know this at the time, but when I went back and kind of analyzed that season of my life, it became very apparent that, what was going on the stage of debate, whether it was a Christian versus an atheist or a Christian versus someone from a different tradition, there was this whole business of having to prove one's faith to be right and the other faith or the other idea to be wrong. And something about that was very appealing to my ego because of the doubt, right? So the doubt came with a little bit of fear, but the more I convinced myself that I was right because so-and-so could prove it, and then I would just accept what they were saying and believe what they were saying because they said it and they're the expert and they know the truth, the more it would become like a coping mechanism for my fear that was coming from the doubt. And then there is something to proving your faith or your belief system to be the one and only way. It's like this egoic charge or some kind of, and the thing with the ego is it needs to be certain and it needs to be right. So I guess what I'm saying is my ego was being very much fulfilled and fueled because it was getting the rightness and it was getting the certainty from convincing myself that what these experts were saying about the faith and how they could defend it, what was true was the one and only absolute truth. But if I was honest with myself, that season of my life was a very interesting season because even when I was drunk on my own dogma and knee deep in the indoctrination, there were still some doubts. There were still some uncertainties that I had, and I didn't know what to do with that. And then what happened was I stepped into the world of practicing some of these conversations with people that were kind of like training me for the stage of apologetics, or not necessarily the public stage or like being on TV or on social media, but just having conversations like in public with people who disagreed with my faith or my theology. So I was training for that. I was preparing for that, studying, and like I said, spending a lot of time in the Bible. And then the time came where I started having conversations with people who believed differently. And one of the things I noticed was that there were certain questions that were being presented to me about my faith. And I was trained to have these default responses, these programmed answers. It was very robotic. And a lot of these responses were not sufficient. They were very surface level, very they weren't true explanations or reasons or answers. And the person I was debating would pick up on that and then use that to their advantage. And so that became problematic for me. And then I started thinking, hey, wait a second. Why do we have to have all these default robotic responses to certain questions that are challenging? Why can't we just answer them for ourselves? And the truth was, I could have thought for myself in that moment, but I wasn't trained to do that. I wasn't trained how to think. I was trained what to think. And this was my big epiphany. This is when everything started to really change for me, because at that moment, I started to realize, hey, I really don't know what I think I know. All I know is what has been handed to me, and I just accepted it, and I believe it, but I can't really explain why. I can't really defend it. I can give you like a scripted answer and call that a defense or call that a rebuttal, but it's not. It's not really that. And so what was it that started this process of me moving out of that religion? Well, it was honesty. And notice I said process, because this wasn't something that happened overnight. This was something that was it took some time. It took years of me having to wrestle with this, and eventually the honesty led to me questioning a lot more. And like I said, I had problems with some of the doubts, and then some of the robotic programmed answers I was led to give in response to certain things. Because of all of that, that led me to go home and to start doing my own homework and to start studying for myself and thinking critically, thinking independently. And this was honestly the first time in my life that I had actually done that. And it kind of shocked me, because that feeling of actually feeling at liberty to study for yourself, research for yourself, and come to your own conclusions and think critically was one of the most empowering feelings I've ever felt. And I really took that and became addicted to it. And it was like, okay, there's a lot I need to start questioning. And the curiosity, the open-mindedness grew and grew and grew. And I wasn't telling anyone this, because here's the thing. In most religious communities or systems, institutions, questions or certain questions are frowned upon, or critical thinking in general is deemed as arrogance or pride, which is interesting. And that was something I was starting to pick up on. And so I would go home and do my own research and study for myself, but I wasn't telling anyone. I wasn't telling any pastors or any of my Christian friends or teachers. I was doing this alone and keeping it to myself. But eventually, once you start doing this, once you start practicing critical thinking, independent thinking, especially if it's for the first time, you start to see things, and you start to have this expansion of consciousness. And it's kind of like being a fish that's born in a fish tank, thinking that the fish tank is everything that there is and the ultimate, and everything you need to know is in that tank about reality. And that's just not true. It couldn't be further from the true. It's actually complete bullshit, because there's actually an ocean, right? And so once you go beyond the boundaries of your theological framework or whatever your belief system is, it doesn't have to be religion. It can be political. It can be any area of life, philosophical, literally anything. You go beyond that and you start to see like, whoa, like this is a lot bigger, and there's a lot more to this than I thought. And I didn't know about this or about that. That becomes so addictive, and that's the only way I can really describe it, because you're so drawn, your soul is so now focused on truth and Yeah, so once this started for me, it led to me going, like I said, beyond the boundaries of my theological framework, beyond the boundaries of my tradition, the different creeds and doctrines that were supposed to be, established absolute truths, and you couldn't question them, or if you believed differently, you were considered deceived. And I'm thinking, this is another part of this. I'm thinking, wait a second. These are beliefs that people came up with years ago, hundreds of years ago, or whatever, centuries ago. So their beliefs, their faith statements, why are we treating them as absolute truths? There's no evidence to back up any of this stuff. But we're supposed to accept these things and not use our God-given reason and intellect and critical thinking skills in our own way of perceiving it. We're just supposed to accept it based upon blind faith and circular reasoning. And this is the key. This is the answer. In that moment, I started to see that religion, or at least the religious system that I was brought up in, was programming me to not think for myself and to believe things that don't have any ground to them or any evidence, which to me is, yeah, let me say this. This is one of those things where until you go beyond the boundaries or the walls, whatever you want to call it, until you transcend it, you can't see it. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. But to me, when you're programmed to not think for yourself, to not listen to your intuition, to not ask questions, to not be open-minded, but just to believe things because someone is telling you, to me, that becomes very dangerous. It's very dangerous. And it's full of control and manipulation. One of the things that happened when I got into this whole thing about studying for myself and becoming obsessed with it was when I went beyond my tradition, I started studying all the other traditions, or a lot of them, especially in the East, and philosophy, psychology, all these different things. And then I started picking up on patterns, because when you start studying psychology and history and even philosophy, you learn so much, and it's just this surge of energy. And like I keep saying, this massive expansion of consciousness. And you start to see patterns, so pattern recognition. And you start to see things throughout history, and you start connecting dots, and you start to see these behaviors and how systems operate and how it's so similar. And, Mark Twain has the famous quote where he says, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes." So you become very familiar with that, and you start to see that there's certain things that are in place, and things like control and manipulation and fear tactics that are embedded into so many of these different religious systems. And I experienced this tremendously growing up, especially in my faith and in my community, because like I said, it wasn't just that critical thinking and questions were deemed as arrogance or prideful or something that you shouldn't be doing. There was always some kind of fear behind it too. It was full of fear, right? Because there was this whole notion of hell. The whole notion of hell, of eternal damnation, said that if you're not a believer, if you don't believe like us, if you're not in the one and only true faith, then you're going to go to hell forever. So you learn to just accept and submit and believe because you don't want to take a chance of going to hell. Do you see that? Do you see what's going on there? And it's very manipulative because it's like if you question hell, which is one of the main things I started questioning, But when you start questioning that and the afterlife, then you're told, hey, if you don't believe in hell, then you're not a true believer, you're not a real Christian, or you're deceived. And if you're not a real Christian, then, hey, you could go to hell if you're rejecting truth, if you're rejecting what the Bible says, which the Bible doesn't even teach this whole notion of eternal conscious torment that came much later in the religion of Christianity. And I have made several videos covering this. So if you look on my channel or just type in my name and then hell, you will find many different videos where I talk about my whole story with deconstructing that particular doctrine and many other things pertaining to that. But anyway, yeah, so it's tough. It really is, because when you're in it, it feels so real. There's so much pressure, and there's always that deep underlying fear. And that's how you are being controlled. So number one, you're programmed to accept things based upon blind faith, no evidence, and then circular reasoning. The evidence is, well, it's true because the Bible says so, or because whatever, or like, a famous one is, our religion is the one and only way, or Jesus is the one and only way because he said it. And the Bible is true because it says it's true. And it's like, that's not evidence. That's circular reasoning. And how do you even know that Jesus said that? You don't know that. And do you even know like how these books were formulated and why? Like, there's so many different things in there, right? There's so much assumption that gets confused, or assumption somehow becomes no, oh, it's not assumption, it's absolute truth because, here it is, it says it in this book. Well, there are many books that say many different things. And here's the thing, like, if you want to believe that, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. If that's your faith, great. But let it be faith, let it be a belief. As soon as you turn it into an absolute truth and you start telling other people that they're wrong because they think differently or that they believe differently, that's when it becomes dogma and you become drunk on your own dogma, and then you can't see clearly. And there's so much indoctrination that gets built up over time, and yeah, it's really tricky to navigate. So what started this for me? Again, honesty, critical thinking, pattern recognition, and then seeing that, okay, this is a program. Religion is a program. And in this program, you were controlled by fear. Now the question I had to ask myself was, do I want to continue to live in this? Do I want to continue to live my life based upon a belief that isn't true? It cannot be proven. Someone made it up. And do I want to just accept this and shut down my ability to think and to see for myself and to study for myself and to live from that place of empowerment and freedom? And again, this decision was not an overnight decision. It took time, it took years, but eventually I was like, yeah, there's no going back. There is absolutely no going back. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you discover the truth within yourself, within your being, and who you really are, you move away from belief, really, in needing some kind of external teaching or doctrine to satisfy some kind of egoic need for certainty. And that's typically when the inward journey starts and it becomes experiential instead of intellectual or theological or philosophical. And for me, I said, I'm going to spend time getting out of my headspace, going into my heart. And that's when I started practicing meditation. And through meditation, which requires no dogma, no belief, no religion, it's just yourself, it's your own being, your own awareness. Through meditation, I discovered this presence, and words don't do it justice, but to me, these are the best words I can use to at least try to point to it. But what I discovered beyond my mind, beyond my beliefs, beyond my conditioning, beyond my body and ego and all these different things was this presence of pure, unconditional love. And eventually, as I spent time resting in this presence, I found that I am not separate from this presence. I am this presence, and this presence is fundamentally one. There's no separation here. And the transformation that this produced in my life was immense and more than any book or teacher or teaching or doctrine or philosophy could ever give me. And that's, it's hard to describe the power in that and what that's been like for me, really, but it's yeah, I'm honestly speechless. And there is fruit that becomes evident in one's life, and yeah, I'll just leave it at that. And when I say that, I mean you start to notice things in your own life, not about judging other people's life or anything like that, because this presence is non-judgment. It's non-judgment, unconditional love. But in a very natural and effortless way, you start to notice this patience and this presence and this compassion and kindness and open-mindedness in your own life. That's what I mean. Okay, you notice it in your own life, and it's no more us versus them. It's no more I'm right, you're wrong, because you're now operating from oneness, from unity consciousness, and it is something that can be experienced, and there's no more need to divide or to play the game of we have it all figured out, and all of that is just the ego operating in different forms and fashions and group settings and systems and institutions. It's just the ego. There's the personal ego, there's the group ego, the collective ego. Once you start to see that, it's very apparent. But anyway, to finish this video, to conclude, this is just something I would encourage all of you to think about and to consider. Because like I said, I don't know if you're someone that grew up in religion or if you experienced like the religious indoctrination and these different beliefs that you just told you had to believe in and you couldn't question, and that was it. Or maybe it was in a different aspect of life. Like I mentioned earlier, this can pertain to many different aspects of life and different kinds of conditioning and stuff like that. But the encouragement here is to start asking questions and to remain curious and open-minded and to start embodying and practicing the God-given gift of critical thinking. It's not a bad thing. It's not a demonic thing. That's another thing. That's part of the manipulation. Oh, you're critical thinking? You're coming to different conclusions than we are? Oh, that's the devil. anything outside this box, anything beyond this book is inspired by the devil. And the reason you're thinking for yourself and asking questions is because that's what the devil did. Do you know how much manipulation and control comes with that, with telling someone that, oh, if you think differently than me, or if you think for yourself or ask questions, it's because the devil is in your mind and the devil is convincing you to do this? Like, just think about that. Think about how controlling that can be, right? So I often say, like, if there's an energy of fear or manipulation or guilt or shame behind what someone is saying, your soul will pick up on that. And if you trust your soul, if you see what's going on through your intuition, you just move past it and you don't accept it. But if you're not in tune with your intuition, if you're not listening to your heart, not listening to your soul, you're just going to accept that because you're going to live from fear. And you're going to say, well, it's better for me just to believe in this and to do what they say because I don't want to go to hell. And that's the other thing, it's taught that, oh, your heart is wicked and evil, so don't ever trust your heart. That's also of the devil. Yeah, so you get what I'm saying. My heart for you is to be free, is to live from your soul, and to be able to ask questions that no one is asking, because that is how we grow and evolve individually, and that is also how we help the collective consciousness grow and evolve. And to me, that's really important. So anyway, that's all I have for today. If you found this video helpful, informative, or insightful, please leave a thumbs up at the bottom of the screen and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.